wrapped up against the autumnal chill, but still in full throat.
And what are we going to do? Climate justice, that's right!
And a riposte to Boris Johnson, who'd opened the day, citing her famous saying that these gatherings amount to no more than blah, blah, blah.
No more blah, blah, blah! No more blah, blah, blah! No more blah, blah, blah! No.
A short distance over there, Boris Johnson framed his opening remarks around the anger over here. He said it's justified. He quoted Greta Thunberg. Well, you can see the response. It's a pretty clear thumbs down. What did you think about Boris Johnson framing his introduction, quoting Greta Thunberg, blah, 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 and saying your anger is justified?
Well, isn't he just doing what his people do, the colonizers do? They're stealing. He's totally stealing words.
The action is not enough now, so it's like defeating and empty words like everyone says, and so many blah, blah, blah. So we want climate justice, we want gender justice, we want social justice, because there's no human rights without the climate crisis consequences, so that's
What do you think when you hear Boris Johnson say, look, his goal is to keep it at 1.5 degrees?
It's like sad, I think. We have to be more ambitious.
Frustration after a chaotic start to the day. Perhaps with an inauspicious signal from the heavens as the conference opened in sullen mood. The core target of keeping average global temperatures no higher than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial temperatures could be in trouble after the richest countries failed to agree to phase out coal consumption. And they still have not met a $100 billion target to help poorer countries adapt to existing climate change. On the upside, there'll be agreement on deforestation tomorrow, and possibly moves later to cut methane.
Please welcome the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson.
A gloomy assessment from the man in the chair.
2 degrees more and we jeopardise the food supply for hundreds of millions of people as crops wither, locusts swarm. 3 degrees and you can add more wildfires and cyclones, twice as many, 5 times as many droughts and 36 times as many heat waves. 4 degrees and we say goodbye to whole cities.
Grave warnings, but also an upbeat note from the world's second largest emitter.
We're standing at an inflection point in world history. We have the ability to invest in ourselves and build an equitable, clean energy future, and in the process, create millions of good-paying jobs and opportunities around the world.
This is my message from
Not the most scintillating of days for this president. But from a senior Tory, progress is being made.
Well, these conferences are iterative processes. It's an evolution. It's not a revolution overnight. You're not going to change behaviour. So I think we've seen a really important commitment by the 2 biggest nations in the world who are emitters at the moment. You know, first of all, the change in president in the United States means that President Biden is in the room. He's reversing the position that the US was taking under the previous administration. That's vitally important. And secondly, China has made a commitment to go net zero by 2060. They've never done that before.
That are also not being
Huddling together, within earshot of world leaders, protesters show they are here to stay.
again.
Well, we're joined now by Allegra Stratton, the Prime Minister's COP26 spokeswoman, Rob Cameron, Global Head of Public Affairs for Food and Beverage Corporation Nestle, and climate change activist Mikaela Loach. Welcome to you all. Allegra, let's start with you and the situation we see tonight. India, net zero by 2070. That is a disappointment, surely.
No, it isn't, Mark. It's a country with 1.4 billion people. Narendra Modi talks about wanting his country to develop economically.
Of course, but 2050 is the aim, isn't it, of this conference?
2070 is positive. It's more than we thought. If you think about where we were, certainly when I spoke to you last in the summer, where we hadn't got these big net zero commitments from the G20. When Alok Sharma started this process, we had just 30% of the world covered by net zero. Now, tonight, we are at triple that. We're up at nearly 90%. Indeed, we may be at 90%. I'll come on to India in a second. So the overall picture tonight is absolutely positive. On India in particular, for this country that wants to be able to economically develop at the same time as deal with carbon emissions, it was more than we expected. And there's more than that. If you look at what they're doing this decade, which is the absolute priority for us in the next 2 weeks at COP26, they are saying they'll be at 50-50 on renewables by 2030. They are saying that whereas they were going to go for 450 gigawatts of renewable energy, it's now 500. So there are positive pictures that mean independent analysts, don't take my word for it, but independent people think that it's a set of policies that is consistent with 2 degrees. Now, we want to be going to 1.5, and that is what we are pushing for. And that's why you heard the Prime Minister's language today saying that right now we are not yet hearing enough. Going into COP26, we were at 2.7 degrees. We need to be getting it closer to 1.5.
But doesn't the Indian announcement today and the one we had from China in their nationally determined contributions just before the summit, that they're going to keep increasing the output until just before 2030, doesn't that underline the limits of what a host can do, of what the Prime Minister can do with 2 big emerging economies like that, still increasing their emissions for some years to come?
Far from it, Mark, because at the G20, we also had the move to completely end the international financing of coal. So we are moving forward, but that is why the Prime Minister
progress,
said
but it's a different plane.
It's
not stopping these huge emerging economies increasing their emissions.
We're pushing on every single front we can. We have the World Leaders Summit for the next 2 days. Then we have these themed days, the first of which is cash, the second of which, on Thursday, is coal. You will see during those days more and more commitments from different countries. If you like, it's about ambition, then it's about action, then it's about acceleration. Coming into COP, we needed to get these net zero commitments. We've had, first of all, the G20 was the first G20 that was net zero. We actually said it in the communique. I'm sure you studied it in depth. We've heard from the Indians today. We have now a net zero commitment from them. Some weeks and months ago, we didn't have that. We also have the granularity of the renewable commitment. And then we will have the action over the next 2 weeks on coal, cars, cash and trees. It matters because they are the big levers we will be pulling that will allow us to bring down emissions by this decade. And then we need to accelerate because we need to go faster. Nobody is hiding that. You know, you couldn't have the Prime Minister be clearer in his speech today. We are at 1 minute to midnight. We need to hurry up.
Go faster, but still fly internally from London to Manchester if you want to, when many European countries are looking at stopping that. What's the moral argument for saying, in this situation, in this climate emergency that the Prime Minister sketched out today, sure, we'll take an internal flight?
Personal choice. Personal choice is running through this entire agenda. But also...
You have to make hard choices in the common interest eventually.
But personal choice, individual choice, and this Prime Minister is not going to stand up and tell anybody the choices that they should make, but what he will do...
Really?
No, he's not. And he doesn't do, if you listen to him. But what he does do is take the decisions in Whitehall that mean that the technology is liberated and given the best chance of coming on stream quickly enough. You saw it in the net zero strategy. You've seen money going into sustainable aviation fuel. That, in the end, will mean, jet zero as we call it, will mean that flights are lower carbon. Not right now. I'm not pretending it is right now. But if you're particularly talking about internal flights, they are a very, very small fraction of the carbon emissions that we need to be bringing down.
Let's widen it out, because there are some other actors in these equations, of course, including the corporate ones, giant corporations like Nestlé, a very nice profit for shareholders, £9.9 billion. But what would be the harm in sacrificing some of that in the interests of a more green corporate effort?
Yeah, well, you know, we've heard a lot in the last 24 hours in the run-up to this COP that it's code red for humanity. And, you know, this is true. and it's not new news. We've known about this for some time, and it's why many of us in the business community have been focusing our efforts on addressing our emissions, and our company, Nestlé, is no different. But what we have done, which is perhaps a little bit different, is that in December 2020, we published our net zero roadmap. We were one of the first, if not the first, major food and beverage companies to set out a course which charts the reduction of our emissions to net zero by 2050.
But as a responsible company, I mean, on the one hand, big profits, great. You know, the people in the financial world love it, shareholders love it. But isn't there an interest to sacrifice some of that in terms of the way the company's perceived, the actions it takes, the reality of its policies, the amount of waste?
Yeah, so if you look at actually what we announced, you know, we've actually announced some really substantial investments. And what we have to do, because what we have to do is not really 2050 that counts, it's the next 5 or 10 years that count. And that's why we're investing 1.2 billion Swiss francs in sparking regenerative agriculture by 2025. And that's a huge investment in a massive transformation of our agricultural supply chains.
Mikaela Loach, let's bring you in. Impressed by what you've heard so far?
I mean, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think that I'm actually just frustrated and also heartbroken. I think so often what we hear is just all this greenwashing and all of this like pursuit of this social license to exist of these big corporations, and especially from Boris Johnson, like quoting Greta Thunberg in his speech when he ignores what climate activists want, what everyone wants actually is a livable future, and he's still pursuing new oil and gas licenses, which is not something that a climate leader should do, and also is completely inconsistent and incompatible with a 1.5 degree target and a livable future. So yeah, it's all been incredibly frustrating.
What would you like to see a big food company like Nestlé doing?
I think that sustainability goes beyond just, I guess, emissions and things like that. It goes beyond how they treat their workers and how they treat the people in their supply chains. It goes into removing modern slavery from your supply chains, because we can't have climate justice without the justice part. We can't have that without looking after people. And the huge amount of harm that Nestlé has done all over the world cannot be undermined or ignored. And I think that big corporations like this that pursue profit over anything else are never going to get us any sort of sustainability or a good future.
I really would like to come back on that, because one of the things we talk about a lot, and our chief executive talks about this a lot, is this notion of a just transition. We simply have to work with people in local communities. That's why we support farmers. We have 500,000 farmers around the world working directly with them to help them make the transition. I'll give you another example when it comes to forests. That's a big subject for tomorrow. You know, deforestation, ending deforestation is absolutely priority for us. But the key thing then is to move forward to what we call a pro-forest agenda, where we bring in the issues of human rights, indigenous people and local communities, and looking at forests through the lens of human rights. That's the way to have something that's more about something you're for rather than stopping. And I completely agree with what Mikaela says. You absolutely have to bring human rights into this forests agenda.
Right. And in terms of mobilising people, something you are passionate about, to what extent does the ability to mobilise people in China or India, or the lack of that, worry you and pose a challenge for mass movements in this?
I think I'd prefer to focus on mass movements in the UK, because I think that when we talk about where the responsibility lies for the climate crisis, like where kind of this economic model that has created this crisis was created and then exported, I think that that responsibility lies very heavily with countries like the UK, like European countries and the US. And I think that these countries and the people within them are the people who have the responsibility to decarbonise here as quickly as possible, and realising that, yes, it's a different situation in other countries, purely also because of the difference in time that's been allowed for an economy to develop elsewhere. And therefore, I think it's important that we focus here in the UK on mobilising people, especially with COP happening here and with this UN climate summit happening in the UK. We must use this opportunity to highlight the hypocrisy that this UK government has around climate. They say they're climate leaders, and they're wanting to approve new oil and gas fields. They say they're climate leaders, and they give £4 billion of public money to the North Sea oil and gas companies since 2016.
Well, let's come back. Mikaela, sorry, let's come back to Allegra on this. Decarbonise as quickly as possible, which seems to be in tune with what you were saying earlier, but you were putting it still down to personal choice.
I was about to say PM would agree with absolutely everything Mikaela just said, until she went on to... Mikaela, PM would completely agree with you, and I think he said it in his speech. We have a responsibility. What was the question?
So would Boris Johnson say that we should stop the Cambo oil field and we should not be approving any new oil and gas?
So what I was going to say is the Prime Minister completely agreed with you, and the point of his speech was that we have a responsibility as one of the countries that has developed and enjoyed economic development based on oil. We have a responsibility now to help those countries who also want to develop, and we will do that through technology, and we will do that through innovation, and we will do that through spreading all of the gains that we are seeing with our tech in the United Kingdom. We will spread that, and that is what will help eventually net zero become reality, and all of us nail this decade, because that's fundamentally what you're talking about as well.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So what I'm saying is that we need to have, we can't just be pursuing net zero, we have to have real zero.
I'm agreeing with you. It's about action this decade, and that's what the Prime Minister was very clear about today.
Allegra Stratton, Mikaela Loach, Rob Cameron.